Rascal is a disappointing game that was released for the PlayStation 1. It was the first game that excited me before it launched, but dashed my expectations when I finally played it. Rascal isn't a very popular game, so I guess I'll begin by explaining how this mostly forgotten game managed to excite me. I was fairly young then, and I'll admit that my age was a major factor in building my excitement. The PS1 was still a new console, and 3D games were a marvel I hadn't experienced yet. Any game would have excited me, but Rascal was the game I latched to the tightest. Once I saw its bizarre TV ad featuring crazy surgeons and asking if you could save your dad, I was hooked. A PlayStation and Rascal was all I wanted. It was the first ad I had seen for the PS1, and possibly the first TV ad I had seen for any video game, so it left a big impression on me. But the biggest factor came from one little logo, Jim Henson's Creature Shop. As soon as I saw Jim Henson's name, my anticipation skyrocketed. I had only recently seen Labyrinth and Dark Crystal, and I loved those movies. Knowing that Jim Henson's Creature Shop was helping design the game cemented in my mind that Rascal was going to be a great game. So with a big name like Jim Henson backing the game, what went wrong? First off, Jim Henson's Creature Shop seems to have had very little to do with the game's design. The back of the box suggests as much. Rascal character designed by Jim Henson's Creature Shop. Keyword character, as in the Creature Shop drew some concept art for the lead character, and that was the extent of their involvement. However, the credits do list 6 people from the Creature Shop, so they might have created more art than I'm giving them credit for. Either way, the Creature Shop didn't seem to do much, and it is a little misleading to heavily advertise their involvement in the game. And now it's finally time to examine the game itself. For a PS1 game, the models and textures are pretty good. Characters have a cartoony look that works well with the low poly graphics. Some of the more goofy looking characters also got a big laugh out of me, whether this was intentional or not. The game also has a lot of nice looking bubble effects, but that's where the compliments end. The game is divided into many small rooms with low ceilings, and the unruly camera makes everything overly cramped. There are also a few areas with very serious lighting problems that not only look bad, but also make the game nearly unplayable. A few more minor things make the game look sloppy, such as occasional drawing issues that will make Rascal's legs disappear. Rascal has to save his dad from the time overlord Cronin. Beyond this, things are very vague. For some reason, you have to travel to the past and present of 5 locations, collect sand for an hourglass in each of these locations, then fight Cronin in the future. Doing all of this will unlock the Corridors of Time, where Rascal can finally defeat Cronin for good. Cronin himself is an odd character with unclear motives. He captures Rascal's father, Professor Clockwise, because Clockwise built a time machine. But it's not clear why Cronin cares about the time machine. Does he want to prevent other people from time traveling? Or is he actually incapable of traveling through time himself? Maybe Cronin is just a guy in a really ugly costume, someone who claims to be a time overlord even though he has no actual dominion over time. He certainly doesn't command a powerful army. His soldiers seem to consist of rats, fish, and eagles. He's just snatching up defenseless creatures and sending them back in time to be a mild nuisance. The most formidable enemies are the denizens of each time period, and it's not clear if they even fight for Cronin. The manual suggests that they have been brainwashed or bribed by Cronin, but I think this claim is really just more hot air from Cronin. If you pop into the past and start hitting people with your science bubbles, they're probably going to fight back. Now let's take a moment to talk about the bubbles. Time travel in Rascal is represented by wibbly-wobbly bubbles, and they are everywhere. Rascal has a bubble gun, you hop in bubbles to time travel, enemies appear from bubbles, and there are also health bubbles, life bubbles, poison bubbles, air bubbles, and bubbles inside of bubbles, just to name a few. At least the developers could stick to a theme. And it seems obvious that the bubble gun and heavy bubble theming was chosen because it is kid-friendly. However, if you remember that bubbles represent time travel, Rascal's seemingly wimpy bubble gun is actually very brutal. It doesn't kill its victims, it sends them somewhere else in time, or it might actually erase them from time completely, a fate much worse than death. Also, the gun never really runs out of ammo, it just fires weaker science bubbles when it runs out of the good stuff. It is a weapon you do not want to underestimate. Let's begin with Rascal's controls. Bluntly, they stink. Rascal moves like a Roomba. constantly bumping into walls because he can't see more than 2 feet in front of himself. This is a terrible control scheme for a platforming game. You're constantly readjusting Rascal to get him ready to jump to the next platform, and you can easily fall off in the process. Also, rotating Rascal isn't as simple as it looks. You have to come to a full stop and wait a brief moment before you can rotate. If you press left or right just a tad bit early, Rascal will keep walking instead of rotating. Thankfully, you can force Rascal to stop walking by pressing L1, but this is an easy feature to overlook. Ultimately, the platforming is very tedious and it is easily the biggest obstacle to enjoying the game. Although, without the platforming, the game would be too easy and uninteresting. Which segues to combat, a dull act of attrition. In general, enemies have one fighting tactic: charge. And while the enemies have this one tactic, I have 3. Ignore the enemies, slowly back away from the enemies while firing, or stand on a table. Tables are surprisingly effective at stopping enemies. The awful camera hinders combat and platforming quite a bit too. You can easily walk through some rooms multiple times without ever knowing there was an enemy in the room. The camera is at its worst when you enter a new room. Many times enemies will start charging at you before you can get adjusted to your new surroundings. And when you start backing away from an enemy, you are often left with a camera angle that doesn't have the enemy in view. The camera gets hung up on every wall and its controls are worthless. I found ignoring the camera controls to be the best course of action. The camera also has a bad habit of joking around very suddenly. It can be disorienting, and I wouldn't be surprised alone that this game induces motion sickness in most players. The game also includes several underwater areas. Swimming is stiff and imprecise, but the water levels were my favorite simply because there was no threat of platforming. Yes, the platforming is so bad I would rather play a slow water level. Another recurring mechanic worth mentioning is sliding down half-pipes. There are several scattered throughout the game, and they vary wildly in difficulty. Most of the challenge comes from the different ways the game prevents you from seeing the approaching obstacles. Some pipes are too dark to see in, and others bend so dramatically you can't see around the corner. Maybe the most annoying aspect of Rascal is its crazy difficulty curve combined with its limited life system. You begin with 3 lives and 0 continues. That is plenty of lives for most of the game, but many levels have one random room that is far more difficult than any other. Things go from cakewalk to game over in a single room. There is a save system in lieu of continues, however your life, health, and ammo totals carry over when you continue. Nothing is replenished, and you can only save between levels. I advise saving after every level, but only if you have 3 or more lives. You want to have 3 lives when you reach the final levels, because these levels don't have any extra lives, and you can easily get caught without enough lives to complete the game. So it is worth your time to replay a level if you lost too many lives while completing it. Nothing is more annoying than restarting from the beginning because you saved at an unwise time. Rascal is filled with too many frustrating and silly moments to go over all of them, but I would like to share some of my favorites. A great place to start is the opening cutscene. It's poorly lit like half the game, it features enemies that aren't in the game, and it has some of the funniest looking characters I've ever seen. It fits firmly in the realm of so bad it's good. I don't have anything to say about the first 2 levels, so I'm going to skip straight to Atlantis Pass. This is where I suspect most players will get stuck. The platforming starts to be a real hindrance here, and it is at its most infuriating in this unbelievable mess of a room. First off, you're stuck with this ridiculous camera, which leads to something I haven't mentioned yet. The movement controls are completely independent of the camera's position, so you always have to press buttons based on Rascal's perspective and not the camera's. This means when you enter this room, you have to press right to turn left and left to turn right. But that is the least of this room's problems. Water will begin to rise when you land on the first platform, but if you don't reach the last platform quickly enough, the water will start to drain when you land on it, and these platforms are stunningly difficult to land on. Because of all of this, I never try to jump onto all of the platforms. Instead, I only jump into the first platform and opt to take a hit when I jump across to the upper platform. This is definitely a room that can drain lives and cause a sudden game over, and the worst part is, you have to go through this room twice. The final annoyance in Atlantis Pass is its half-pipe. And just look at it. It is so dark you can barely tell what is happening. these rocks might as well be invisible. Although you don't have to use the half-bite to complete the level. You can backtrack through this room instead, so you're free to pick your poison, I guess. That's not the worst lit part of the game, however. The biggest lighting problem is in Castle Present. In this room there was a door hiding in a dark corner, and you have to enter it to complete the level. I think the developers wanted the player to recall that there was a door here in Castle Past, but honestly, who is going to remember that? The next memorable level is the Wild West. It's a small level filled with tiny rooms. With its cardboard cutout carriages and caves, it feels more like a movie set than a Wild West town, which is actually appropriate because the Wild West becomes a movie studio later in the game. To demonstrate how small this level feels, let's take a look at the train station. Here, you walk past a train, grab a key item, then leave. The only thing in your way is a bit of steam. Most of the rooms are this small, the only exception being rooms focused on platforming, of course. Now comes my favorite part of the game. Do I even need to say anything? I mean, the cart doesn't even ride along the rails. It's just another half-pipe with rails slapped onto the floor texture. And the tunnel is so small Rascal can barely move. Okay, nothing can really follow the minecart, but I do need to talk about the future. The future levels are disappointing and monotonous because all you do is fight Cronin. And since there are 5 locations, you have to fight him 5 times. Every battle is basically the same. Cronin stands in the middle of a room and throws things at you. The setting changes and the things he throws changes, but everything else remains the same. 4 of the levels are mind-numbingly easy. But of course, Atlantis is stupidly difficult. In Atlantis, Cronin throws homing sundials that are nearly inescapable. I probably lost this battle 6 times before I had any idea how to avoid the sundials. Occasionally, I would escape a dial, but I didn't know why. Eventually, I noticed a pattern to my lucky escapes, and I was able to form a strategy. Now, I will try to explain how I defeated Cronin in Atlantis. Like every other battle, you simply need to run around him to avoid his attacks. However, in Atlantis there was a small catch. Where you begin running from will determine if you escape the deadly sundials. Look closely at the clock Cronin is standing on. If you are standing near the 6 or the 12 when you start running, then you will escape the sundials. If you are standing almost anywhere else, you will get hit. And once you know this trick, the battle becomes very easy, and thankfully one of the quickest battles. The other battles with Cronin drag on for far too long. After completing these battles, you unlock the Corridors of Time, where you have to fight 5 more bosses before fighting Cronin a 6th time. These battles are also boring, but at least the pirate boss looks cool. It's a hover turtle with guns. The real threat in the Corridors of Time is the platforms. The designers put mostly black platforms in a mostly black room. The edges are too difficult to see, and there are just so many platforms. Finally, you get to fight Cronin on a tabletop, and this battle is identical to the Wild West battle. The only difference is you are fighting in a smaller arena. But really, who cares? Cronin never moves. And that's the game. I know I hyped Rascal up to be a very bad game, but I no longer believe it to be nearly as bad as I once thought. I mean, it is definitely bad, but it has some so bad it's good qualities that I enjoy more now. These funny moments aren't really good enough to warrant putting up with the game's frustrating platforming, but they are worth seeing at least once. There is one more thing I would like to show before I end the video. In the options menu you can enter a cheat code, and the manual even gives you a hint. It has something to do with Rascal's home life. Alright, a 5-letter word that has to do with Rascal's home life. It's house. The password is house. Anyways, this cheat lets you quickly access any room in the game. You can even start cutscenes. But the best part is traveling between rooms that aren't connected. This will sometimes cause the game to use the wrong textures, and I find this fun to experiment with. But it can cause the game to crash. And now we've reached the true ending. If you want to see more of Rascal, I recorded a full playthrough. You can click this annotation to watch.